Hey everybody, I am here with Brendan, aka BastichB. How's it going?
I'm pretty good, and you?
Excellent. So you're a few hours before me, so it's 8 a.m. for you right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
pretty
it's 10
early.
a.m. for me, so it's why a bunch of people in the comments over the years of my videos have been like, "Wow, Bob looks drunk in that video." No, this is what I look like in the morning. I'm just always half asleep because just trying to grind through a day, get as much sleep as I can, and do it all over. So yeah, if we're sleepy, that's why. So, you are. It's kind of hard to describe your channel because you have these like documentaries about stuff that are great. I loved the Alien one and the Strike one, which we'll get into in a bit. But you also kind of just
Yep.
have other stuff on your channel. So it's kind of like me in that you don't have one channel for documentaries, one channel for talking, one channel. You just kind of
Right.
throw all on one YouTube channel, right?
Yeah. So I try to keep the variety on the channel like pretty broad. The focus mainly of my channel, at least, is the Commodore 64. That's like near and dear to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
It's the computer I grew up on, but I definitely try to have a lot of variety. So it's not just one type of video you always seen. I got documentaries and you know interviews with people and just a whole bunch of stuff covering arcades and all the console stuff and computers. So I just like variety. That's just my personal opinion. I love what I like to
Same.
do on my channel.
So, how did you start doing all of this stuff? Like, what was the dip your toe in the water to begin this?
Yeah, so probably in, I think it was 2018, I kind of got the bug again to play my old Commodore 64. I hadn't played it in more than a decade. I
Mm.
just, kind of just
But you
continued
held on
on.
to your original one. You had it
Uh,
this whole time.
my original one, no, this was one I bought probably in the late 90s. So yeah, I had
Well,
it
I mean,
for
that's what I
so
mean. Like
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
2018, you didn't go out and buy a
No,
C64. You
no,
had one the
I
whole time.
still already had one. It was just like in a box, and I kind of pulled it out and set it up again and started playing some of my old games, like really enjoying it. And I wanted to go on to YouTube and check out a bunch of videos to watch some videos on games, older games that I really enjoyed and stuff like that. And I honestly just couldn't find any videos with like kind of like, proper context to them in terms of like the games that I used to love. And I was kind of surprised. There was really high profile C64 games that I couldn't find any videos that was satisfying to me, like represented the games. Like I felt like it was a bit of a disservice. And I'm not saying there's no good C64 channels or anything like that. That's obviously ridiculous. But I couldn't find anything personally that I like gravitated towards. So I was like, well, screw this. I'm just going to make my own channel and, you know, represent the
Yeah.
games the way I used to like love them and just give them actual context and some sort of historical context with like the making of them and people behind them, just so these games have more representation. So that's the whole reason why I started my
Mm.
channel. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
But you do have a good blend of making sure people know why certain why certain facts are important for that time because and this is kind of a trap that I fall into on both sides. I either over explain or I skip right by it and people are like, well, why did that matter? But
Right.
things like in the Alien one you were talking about the release of the movies and how that related to the reaction of the fans for the games. And if you had left that out, the video would have still been good, but it added much more perspective. And for people that grew up then, it's an immediate click of like, oh, that's right. And
Yeah,
for
yeah.
people who hadn't, younger people, they could be like, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't think there would have been a bad Alien movie, which
Right,
there were, but
right. Yeah, no. That's what I think a lot of videos don't actually do, and they don't put things into perspective. So
mm,
if you didn't grow up with that, exactly what you just said, if you didn't grow up with these games or in that time, you wouldn't really get the gist of what somebody is really saying. You would just get a vague idea of what they're saying. And I'm trying to like make videos so just people that don't know much about a system can actually watch it and enjoy it and have some sort of sense of what's going on, as opposed to like, having like a gatekeeper kind of mentality where if you don't know anything about that system, you've got no chance of really understanding what somebody is talking about. You're just getting like a vague idea. So always try to make it like as open as possible, which I think is like kind of more fun to watch anyway.
Yeah, I mean those videos are good too. It's just as long as like a good example. Somebody in the comments the other day
Yeah.
said, "Hey, I tried to follow this video, but why would you need to use a SCART connector?" And I was like, all I would have needed to do is put, which I did update by the way, but in the description I could have just said this video is for people who've already decided they want to use RGB SCART cables, and
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah.
So now it's up to the viewer. If you look at this and you go, "What the heck is this?" and you don't even bother to click on the description before commenting, now it's on you. But that was a very valid question, and I screwed that up. But it was
Yeah.
also a video that was only really about that subject. It wasn't a video about what is RGB. So it's
Right.
I think as long as you have some kind of very quick and basic disclaimer, like you need
Yeah.
to know what a Commodore 64 is before watching this video,
Yeah.
whereas you really don't. Especially with the Alien video, you absolutely don't, because you mentioned different versions and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like them both. I like both styles.
Cool. Yeah, me too. I mean, I've got to like, try to keep it varied. That's all I can really say. I do like both styles. Obviously, the historical context for me is always like prime. I just love like looking back at stuff and getting that kind of nostalgic feeling and like putting it into perspective, kind of thing.
It's funny though, in the Alien one, I agreed and disagreed with you about something. I actually liked Prometheus. I liked that movie. I don't know why.
Oh
I just thought
man.
it was cool. But
Yeah.
holy crap, that scene where it's going straight forward and you were like, just go left. How about go right? Like, I was so mad in the theater. I was like,
Yeah.
this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I can't believe this is a big budget film. This
Yeah,
is some
yeah.
shit out of a B horror movie.
I know,
Like,
exactly right.
let's go into the back room with all the knives and chainsaws. That's the perfect place to hide. Like, turn left. What is wrong with you?
I know. When I watched it in the cinema, I just couldn't believe what I was watching. I mean, obviously the spaceship is massive, and even if you went left or right, you probably wouldn't have been able to outrun it realistically. But if you were a normal human, you would have looked back and either ran left or right. You would not have carried on running forward. It's ridiculous.
Yes, that absolutely drove me crazy. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, I
And
just
didn't
couldn't
like
stand
the
it.
second one at all. The second
I
one kind
know.
of sucked.
It's terrible. It just gets worse and worse, right?
Yeah.
uh, what a
So,
shame.
how did you start out with the C64 as a kid? Like, was it because in the U.S.
Mhm.
that wasn't the most popular one? Home computers, you had
Yeah.
like IBM PCs, but most kids that I knew, at least when I was growing up, had the NES. Some
Hmm.
were Master System on the West Coast, but it was mostly just like console and
Yeah.
IBM compatible PC. Remember that IBM compatible?
Yeah. I love that. So I grew up in South Africa when I was a kid, and I
Whereabouts?
moved in Durban, South Africa. It's like on the coast,
Okay.
north coast, and so we got mainly, as far as video games go, we got a lot of European video games and Japanese video games. That was predominantly what I grew up on. And obviously, we got US stuff, but it was mainly European and Japanese.
So,
So,
I'm going to interrupt a second. Is
mhm.
South Africa PAL or NTSC? And is it 50
it's
hertz or 60 hertz?
it's PAL.
That's what I thought you were going to
So
say.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
okay. Just checking.
So yeah, so I had a UK Commodore 64. I got it in 1984. My dad bought it. Before that, I was playing at my friend's house, my next door neighbor. He had a Commodore 64, and that was about 1983. So I was like, I started out with the Commodore 64 when it was like originally released, which was pretty cool, and got my own one in 84 and just started playing games like a madman. And we got obviously the European games, all the games on cassette. That's mainly what Europe used for C64 games and basically computer games generally for that kind of time period. Disc games weren't very popular. I did get a disc drive though. I was lucky enough to get one, and then I started pirating games like a madman. That's just part of the Commodore 64 scene. But yeah, that's where it started, and then obviously progressed to like consoles and that later. But my C64, I used that right up until the bitter end, like in 1993. Which I know, as far as US goes, it was long gone before that. It was, it had faded out by like 89 was like the end of like real releases, 89, 90, like, and that's pushing it to the limit. But in Europe, the computer went on for a lot longer, especially games wise. So
Mhm.
I was there right to the end, but I did get a Sega Mega Drive before that. So I was playing like Commodore 64 and a Mega Drive, which is really weird combination, but
It's an awesome
absolute,
combo, though.
I absolutely loved it. So that's where my C64 days started anyway.
It's thinking back to that time, right? I had
Mm.
a Tandy color computer too, so I guess
Mm.
I didn't know this until later in life, but people called it the Coco 2 or something. But
Yeah, I got one
but
right here.
that's awesome. Yes, you do. So I was just about to say, you got the cartridge port right in the side, which you can see
Yeah,
right over your mic,
yeah.
but you also had a cassette adapter for it.
Hmm.
So the cartridges, the games were about Atari 2600 esque,
Right.
maybe a little better, but not really.
Mm.
Certainly not today. Looking back, they would look the same to us today. Maybe
Yeah,
back
yeah,
then we would talk about how much better the graphics were, but then they had a cassette player which you could use to listen to music cassettes. But
yeah.
then you would have to load those games up in memory by playing a cassette. And
Right,
that's just one of those things where, like, I really hope computer and video game museums take the time to set that up and keep it working,
right.
because people need to remember how horrible that was. Like, you get the sense of nostalgia, it's cool, but
Yeah.
like it also, like, I don't think people. It's easy to forget how long it took to boot software back then. Any
Oh
of that.
yeah, it took ages. I mean, my goodness, there was certain C64 games that you would have to. It took like 15 minutes to load, which if you think about it in like realistic terms, 15 minutes is not a long time, but 15 minutes to wait for a single game to load, it's pretty long. But
Yeah.
what I do like about the C64 games, and even like a lot of the European cassette games, at least, the US ones didn't do that much, but they used to have like loading music and pictures that used to come up while the game's loaded, which was very different. And the music was really, really good. So it actually kind of kept you entertained while you waited and you listened to the music and read the instruction manual while you were waiting. So it's kind of very, very nostalgic to load those games up, even now, even though it's like it takes a long time. It's like it makes you appreciate the game when it finally loads, as opposed to now when you just you know put something on like instantly, and then you play it for like a minute, and then you just jump onto something else because you can do it quickly. But when you load up a game off cassette, like right now, like say right now, once that game's loaded, I'm not going to turn it off in like 30 seconds because I've waited like a while for it. So you actually give it a little bit more of a chance, if you know what I mean. Like you don't just skip to the next thing, which I kind of like.
I like both.
Yeah.
What you just said kind of makes me reappreciate that, though, because you're right. You could sit there and open up the manual and know what to expect, and just take a moment to get yourself in the mindset of a game and
Mm.
really sink into it. But at the same time, I could also, in that same era, fire up an NES, go to Tetris, go to B mode, set everything up to 9, and now I'm having
Yeah.
a balls to the wall badass Tetris session, and I probably have 5 of them before your game even starts.
Oh
So I
yeah, of
like
course.
both. I appreciate both of those things.
Yeah, no, they're both good in both ways. I've got a C64 Maxi, which is like the full keyboard version, the one that was released a couple of years ago. That's with the HDMI connection. So I got that, which I use like games. I play games off USB on that, and
Mhm.
obviously it's instant. So that's what I use for like practical aspects of like for the channel. Like, I'm obviously not going to I don't record stuff off the original C64. It's just too cumbersome. I would take like forever to make any video. It just wouldn't, it's simply
Yeah.
not practical in any sort of way, time wise anyway. So I use the
And
I
it's
use
certainly
that.
not
Mm,
practical to do that in a video, but I bet you in a
no.
live stream that might be
Mm.
a good way to get
And
people fired up.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
start
yeah,
your live stream, load the game, and then,
yeah.
just kind of talk, listen to the music.
Mm.
Hopefully you won't get copyright strike for the Commodore music, and then kind
Yeah,
of get
yeah,
into the game.
yeah. That's true. Yeah, pretty much.
So I know I'm jumping around here, and I always do, but for anybody watching this on video, you have a Pac-Man rug on your floor behind you. That's basically the Pac-Man
Yes.
screen, but it's a neat rug. That is pretty cool. I don't think I've seen that one before. Is that like a thing that
Oh.
you could order, or did you stumble across that somewhere?
I stumbled across that. Where did I find that? I think I bought it off Etsy. I go on there like every once in a while, not very often, but sometimes you find something weird and cheap that was cool.
Mm.
And that's actually, I thought it was, I wasn't sure what the quality was going to be like. It's all hit and miss when you buy stuff like that. But it turned out it's actually really cool.
I got two in a row lucky. I got one that's like a hand towel for a bathroom that has like
Yeah.
video game controllers on it, and then I had a toilet seat cover that I had a Super Mario World scene on. So like Mario shooting out of the pipe and the thing, and I put that up on social media, and I was so
Yeah.
annoyed. Nobody commented that it was the
Yeah.
perfect 4:3 aspect ratio. I made all the artwork myself and made sure to line it all up. But yeah, that was two really really cool ones in a row. But I like stuff like that. I'm always kind of looking around, seeing. I've just it took till my late 20s, but I just embraced that I'm weird. I don't really care if anybody doesn't like that about me. So if I want to surround myself with things that make me happy, anybody else could get out of my house if they don't like it. So
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is like my office area where I, like, edit videos and stuff like that. You can't really see it all, but there's just computers and consoles everywhere here, all set up to record stuff. And I just love it. I've got like posters of a Japanese poster up here of Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, the Japanese poster. I've just got crazy stuff all over the place. It's
love it.
just,
You have
I just
your
love it.
arcade marquee of 1943 up there,
Yeah.
which might be cut off when I edit this, but funny, I have the same exact one
Oh, you
in my
do?
bathroom that was signed by Hotego because he did
Oh,
he did the score
nice.
for that. So yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
cool.
That's cool. Yeah, I think I got that one off eBay. Uh, that was a lucky find.
Nice. Yeah,
I
I had
love.
that game for the NES growing up, and I
Oh,
liked that
yeah,
one. Although
yeah.
that's what made us buy a joystick with a turbo function,
Mm.
because that smashing the
Oh,
buttons,
jeez, yeah, I totally
that was
get that.
fun for about 30 seconds, where I was like, "Oh, look,
Yeah,
we're just
yeah,
like the kids from the commercials," and it's like, "Okay, this sucks."
yeah.
Like,
No,
come on.
no. The arcade is absolutely phenomenal. I just love that game. Wow,
Yeah,
played it so much. Like every
it's
time
got
I saw
so
that
many
game.
levels too.
Oh,
It
yeah,
goes on forever. It's not, it's if I wish there was I wish there's like level cheats you could go so you could skip
mm.
towards the end just
Yeah, yeah,
to get right to the harder, the harder
yeah,
levels. But I do enjoy
yeah,
playing it. I like the music, but it
yeah.
goes on and on and
It
on.
does. It does. I think the first one, 1942, is even it feels even longer to me. That game is damn hard.
Yeah. Did they have a port for that for Commodore 64? It was ported to like everything, right?
Yeah, 1942 and 1943. Unfortunately, they're not very good. Uh,
No.
they
The
just
NES
need.
one wasn't terrible. Definitely
Yeah,
not the
yeah,
best
yeah,
port,
yeah.
but it
It's
wasn't
not. It's not
bad.
the best, but it's not terrible either. Yeah, it's kind of like mid range. Yeah, the
Yeah.
C64 one's okay. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but yeah, there's much better arcade conversions.
I mean, is there like a short list of stuff that you would recommend for people who want to, fire up a Mr. Core or go into software emulation and just kind of see what the C64 was like? Or
Ooh, that is so difficult.
yeah, totally.
There's so many games. I did make a video recently, top 200 Commodore 64 games. I couldn't narrow it down to less than 200. I know it's mental. It's like 5 hours long, but uh, if
That's
you want
funny.
to, if you want to check that out, that it gives you 200 recommendations. But my personal favorite Commodore 64 games are um, the Last Ninja 1 and 2. It's like a isometric kind of action adventure games with phenomenal music. Uh, don't play the NES version. It's terrible. It's not even any representation of the game. It's like some sort of hacked down version. and it's not even part one; it's part two, but they call it part one. So confusing. Don't play those. But anyway, Last Ninja 1 and 2, I like a lot of old computer type RPGs. So, like, Ultima games. I know those were on PC and all that. Ultima 4 and 5, absolutely love those. Wasteland, like precursor to like Fallout, basically, and stuff like that. There's a lot. It depends. For Commodore 64, there's a major difference between North American games and European games. A lot of people don't realize that if they don't know anything about the system. So for the US games predominantly, this is not the case for everything, obviously, but it's just generally speaking. Um, RPGs and strategy games and a little bit more in-depth games were more common. And if you look at the European games, arcade style games were way more popular. So, like, arcade conversions and like platform games and racing and that kind of stuff. And obviously, US was a lot different, although there was a lot of crossover. But if you look at the games that were released like officially and games that were promoted for the system, there's a massive difference between the styles of games, which I find very interesting because there's not a lot of systems that have that kind of completely different library of games.
Yeah, yeah, that is a good point. What is there a way that you would suggest that people test these out before jumping into original hardware or anything? I mean, is there one really
Yeah.
good software emulator that people could just use on their PC? Obviously, if you have a Mister,
Mhm.
definitely go that route. But
Yeah.
what would your suggestion be?
Yeah. So if you want to try out Commodore 64 stuff, the easiest way on your PC, at least as far as I'm concerned, is a emulator. It's called VAS. It's probably the best C64 emulator you can find.
Is that just VAS?
VRCE, VAS.
VRCE. Okay.
Yeah, VRCE.
I'm just
So
leaving a note, so I'll make sure to put a link in the
yeah,
Versatile Commodore emulator.
there we are. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's probably the easiest way to do it. You do need to. I mean, you can work everything with a mouse, so you can select everything, but you do need some sort of basic C64 knowledge to understand it a bit. I mean, you could say that about any emulator anyway. If you like boot up some sort of DOS emulator, you need to know some sort of vague idea of what DOS was and how it works. But if you mess around a little bit, you will be able to figure it out. Getting games is very easy. Copyright as far as C64 stuff is, I don't know, it's like almost like public domain. You could probably consider it. I know it's not, but as far as like the community goes, you can find it easy. I would suggest checking out csdb.dk. It's the Commodore scene database. It's got every single game you could possibly ever want, and you can download them in like 1 second because it's like a couple kilobytes of data. The games anyway, so yeah, that's the best place to pick up games. So that'll definitely get you started.
Cool. All right. I just had both of those queued up, so I'll make sure to add that to the show notes and everything.
Awesome.
Um, for people who love original hardware, which,
Mm.
just a quick disclaimer, a lot of people seem to think that I'm this elitist that looks down upon people that use anything other than the original. Couldn't be farther from the
No.
truth. But there are people out there who want the original hardware experience, especially if it's
Right.
something you grew up with or it's something that
Mm.
becomes important to you. I'll always have a Super Nintendo and a Genesis for the rest of my life, even if I don't start playing them less. Doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. But are there versions that you would recommend, and more importantly, what accessories would you think are go-tos for now? Optical drive emulators, disk drive emulators, like kind of give us a rundown of that. What do you use, obviously, too?
Yeah. So for the C64, like I said earlier, actually the way I got back into C64 in general was because of the C64 Mini that got released. I was actually a backer on that a couple of years before it even got released because I wanted it so badly. And that was actually the gateway to get back into C64 because I could play it on like a modern TV on that. I didn't have a CRT at the time, so I had to buy one of those to play. But um, yeah, so there's a lot of options. You got a C64 Mini, which I wouldn't really suggest. I would suggest just going to the next level and get the
Well,
C64 Maxi,
so
what it's
can
called.
you please clarify? Because I can't
Mm.
remember. Does the keyboard actually work on the Mini?
So the keyboard doesn't work on the Mini. So
Okay.
that's is a bit of an issue. You can plug in a regular keyboard into the USB slot. So you've got the experience, but the Commodore 64 keyboard is laid out differently.
Mm,
There's certain keys that are specific to the C64. So if you're using a PC keyboard, you're going to be a bit confused. It's not going to line up, so it makes playing certain games confusing. Uh, Basically. So I would suggest getting the C64 Maxi, which is like the bigger full size version of it, and
mhm,
with a fully functional keyboard. That makes totally sense. And that you can obviously just, like I said earlier, you can just put games onto a USB drive, stick it in, and start playing. And that's the best way to play modern C64 games, I feel. If you're going for original hardware, which I love original hardware, but I use the original hardware just for messing around and playing stuff. You can't use it practically for video applications, but for a C64 that I've got an NTSC one right now because I don't have that. Well, I got a power one, but I use the
mhm,
NTSC one now because I live in Canada. So um, for that, I got a cartridge. It's called a Kung Fu Flash. Basically, it's like a flash cartridge you can put on, um, you know, all your games and put it into the back of the real Commodore 64, which has a cartridge slot. And then
mhm.
it gives you a menu system. So, like a lot of other things like that on other systems. And you can play games that way. That is a phenomenal way to play on your real C64 because the Kung Fu Flash cartridge is not that expensive. So you're not looking at like $300 or $400 like some of these ones out there for certain systems. You're looking at, I think it was $50 or $60, which is pretty
Mm.
reasonable for what you're getting. And so the Kung Fu Flash cartridge, I would highly recommend that, especially if you have an NTSC C64 and a PAL one. It's actually compatible. The
Hmm.
NTSC the NTSC compatibility is not 100% because it's made in Europe, the Kung Fu Flash cartridge. But for me, for just messing around on my real C64 once in a while, to play the games on the real thing, it's perfectly fine. So I think that's a really good solution.
That's awesome. So I was just kind of I'm taking notes as I was listening.
Mm.
So I'm going to have all the links to everything that you just mentioned in the description for people that want to kind of go through all of this stuff. But they all look like pretty decent options. And the mini consoles are definitely good gateway drugs, for
Yeah.
lack of better
Yeah.
description here.
Yeah.
How does the mini and the maxi really compare though? Like, is it going to be a thing where the audio is all off and delayed and there's input
Hmm.
lag, and or is it good enough?
I think I think if you just want to get a nostalgia fix, I think it's good enough. I think for the mini and the maxi, there's a slight delay. It's not enough to even for me. It's not even enough to even complain about. But sound wise, the C64 has like a really awesome sound chip, the SID chip. The music is absolutely phenomenal in the system. And, the Mini and the Maxi do a decent job. Uh, for most games, you're not going to notice too much of a difference. There are certain games where it sounds a little bit off, but sound emulation is pretty difficult. I'm sure you understand that. But
Yeah.
I think like for most people you're going to be pretty happy. So it is a good solution, and I think the mini consoles are really cool things to get people into something, and it doesn't have to be perfect. That's not really the point. it's like a gateway. Like you said, it gets somebody like interested in something, and you can just try out a whole bunch of games really quickly. And I think they're a great idea. I wish they need to make a Dreamcast one. Come on, get on that, Sega.
Agreed. Agreed. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where with the original, the best example, the original Genesis Mini, it's like
Yeah.
one of my cousins asked me about that. I'm like, look,
Mm.
if you want to feel a blast of nostalgia from when you had one as a kid, absolutely buy it. Absolutely buy it. Spend 15, 20 minutes going through a couple of games, playing a few minutes, then put it on your shelf, and you have this really cool box and thing on there,
Mm.
and it's great. But if you actually want to play it, forget it. Whereas
Yeah.
the second one, the Genesis Mini 2, yeah, why don't give it a try, see what you think. If you like it, but something feels off after a couple hours of playing, then go to the different solutions. But hey, you might just like it. That's fine. So I really hope that we get to a point where they're all kind of like that, where they're totally usable and they're not. You don't have to add that huge disclaimer like, well, look, this isn't quite how they play, even on flat
Right.
panels. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so growing up in South Africa, what you said, obviously, there's the European connection and it was PAL stuff, but did you get a lot of things from other parts of the world that maybe other people might not have had exposure to? Like you also mentioned you had some Japanese games that you were able to get there.
Yeah. So a lot of systems weren't officially released in South Africa. You know, I remember the first system I remember actually got officially released by a real company was the Mega Drive or
Hmm.
Genesis. I remember Sega actually was in South Africa and they had, you know, an official presence. So that was the first time I remember an actual company release something. But so everything else was kind of like the Wild West, you know, like you just got, I basically went to import shops all the time, video game import shops, and used to buy the stuff that way because that was the only way to get it. And most of it, like I said earlier, was from Europe, England in particular, and also lots of Japanese stuff.
Did you have to deal with any kind of region modding back then in order to get the Japanese stuff to work or patching or
So,
anything?
so for the most part, the Japanese, my Mega Drive, I got it modded, and so I could play Japanese and PAL European games. So that's how I got that to work.
And there were just
Also,
shops in South Africa that would do that. I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but
oh
like
no, yeah,
this is my first exposure to that. A
yeah,
really good friend of mine grew up in South Africa, but
mm,
she never played video games, so I never
yeah.
got any of this info from her.
Yeah, so there's where I used to live in Durban. Like, if you went, you had to go into the big city to go to these shops or some sort of big mall. But I would always end up stumbling across these small little shops, usually run by some crazy little Chinese guy or something like that. He used to like, there were multiple dudes that used to, there was a Taiwanese guy I used to know, and they all owned these like tiny little shops, but they imported like all the games and they would mod your console for you or whatever
Hmm.
system it was. And, yeah, you just give it to the guy and come back the next day and it's done. And then you have like access to his entire like shop full of Japanese games, which was like absolute like gold mine to me. Like besides the C64, like import games is like my favorites. So yeah, there were quite a lot of those shops. You just had to like, you know, there was no advertising or anything like that. You just had to walk down an alley and then you just happened to see something because that's the way I found all of them. And there was actually this one alley in Durban. I think it was called London House Arcade. It was called Arcade, which is ironic. There were no arcades in there, but there was a whole bunch of these little tiny little like import shops where I used to pick up all the games. And you got them for a pretty decent price too. They were way less than like the official stuff. So, oh, I used to go there all the time. It was crazy.
That's funny.
There was also a lot of pirated games which I used to pick up, which, but that was just part of living in South Africa, I guess.
I had there was only one store that I knew of, but it was only music. It wasn't video games,
Mm,
and they went as far as they had CD duplicators that could even print on CDs. Which
yeah,
nowadays it's like, yeah, I got three of those in the corner that I picked up in a thrift
yeah.
shop for $1. But back in the '90s, that was a big deal, and
That
there
was
was a
yeah.
couple stuff that I bought there that I didn't realize it was a bootleg
Mm,
until really the internet became more mainstream. Because then I'm
right.
looking it up, like, what is this Metallica Garage Days and More? They never had one and more. What's the and more? And it was basically this place just took a bunch of bootlegs they found of their demos and stuck them on at the end of it and made the artwork to make it look like it was a real Metallica CD.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
had a store filled with stuff like that until they eventually got caught and shut down. But it was neat.
yeah. No, that happened a lot. I also remember. I think it was maybe late 80s, early 90s, 89, 90. South Africa got like this massive influx of consoles, bootleg Famicoms. Um, and they were so cheap that everybody I knew under the sun had a Famicom, a Japanese knockoff Famicom in their home, and those things were everywhere. And you could buy the bootleg games. Some of them were in Japanese, some of them were in English. You just had to like roll the dice, buy it and roll the dice to see what you were going to get. And I just remember like country was just flooded with that before the Mega Drive came out, but that was like really cool. I
Yeah,
just
I absolutely love stories like that. And there
uh,
was I'm seeing if I could look it up. I can't find it. There was a friend of mine grew up in Albania, and it was the same
yeah,
story of like their bootleg Famicom stuff, but
yeah,
it was called something crazy. I've talked about it before, um, like the Terminator or something like that, or
yeah,
something
yeah,
weird. It was whatever local company made up a name for it and put
exactly.
it on. But I think his might have been the one that was actually a Sega Genesis, but it looked like a Famicom or something like that. It
Yeah,
was
there's lots of
whatever
weird
weird.
variations. It's so weird. I
Yeah,
just
that's why I kept, that's why I keep
yeah,
asking you all these little nitpick
mm,
questions, because that shit's just fascinating to me. Because
yeah,
we had, I didn't live near a KB Toys, which was a thing back then.
yeah.
I lived near two Toy Works, which is the same thing but a different brand, and they were Nintendo only for a while, and then they had Genesis stuff, and then. I mean, that was really it. They didn't have any Master System things. They didn't have any Commodore or, if you wanted the small computers, you had to go to Radio Shack to get the Tandy stuff, and this. So it was very, very limited for me growing up, which is why I always loved hearing stories about what other people saw as kids.
Yeah, I think the shops in South Africa, as far as games go, were pretty diverse. Uh,
Mm.
the ones in the 80s were very computer related. There was basically no console stuff at all. Computers were a lot more prominent in that time, in the 80s and early 90s. And then consoles obviously became like the driving force. And then like the shops kind of switched, but they were pretty diverse. I was like, I wish I could go back in time and go to those shops now and actually document them. Like because you look online to find stuff about old video game shops and there's hardly anything. Like because we
Yeah,
all just we lived in that time and we didn't think that it was going to go away. So nobody like documented these things. Like there's no I've like no photos or video anything of all the shops I used to go to, which man, it's such a shame that none of those are like around for people to look at now. This will be pretty fascinating. I think if I had to look at them right now, I'd be like, "Whoa, you had that? I didn't even realize it." That kind of thing.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
Right.
So did you the place that you lived, was it more of a city or more of like a town that just had a bunch of shops?
So I used to live out in a place called Queensborough. It was kind of like out in the suburbs. So I used to have to catch a train to go into Durban, like the main city. That's where all the import shops were and where all the arcades were, which I used to go like every weekend, catch a train into the big city and hit up all the arcades, like, all my favorite ones. Used to like start off like the one near the train station and just go to the beachfront area where they had those big, massive arcades and all the way around. And then we used to usually end the day by watching a movie at the cinema and then jump on the train and go home. So it was like this whole thing. But Yeah, it was just such good times. So yeah, you had to go to the big city to check out that kind of stuff.
That's pretty awesome. And when did you end up going to Canada?
So moved to Canada in the end of 1998.
Hmm.
So the first, as soon as I got here, I started looking around for gaming shops. So I'm like, okay, I don't know where I am though, because you come to another country if you've never lived in different countries before. If you go to another country, you basically know nothing. You like zero. You don't even know like left from right. It's very confusing. And I remember we walked from our place, which we were renting when we got here, and I got lost, and we had to catch a taxi to get back to it because I didn't even know like left from right. But the first thing I bought when I got to Canada is I managed to stumble across this Asian mall, and I didn't even know what it was, and I just went in there, and there's just a lot of these weird little shops with just lots of weird stuff. I've just never seen all this stuff before. It was a mixture of Japanese and Chinese like stuff all just mashed together, and I stumbled across an import shop. Of course, I just like my luck, and the first thing I saw there was an import Sega Dreamcast, because this was like near the end of '98, and I just looked and I was just like, I'm coming back next week and I'm buying this. And I came back the next week and I bought it. So I got a Dreamcast immediately, like, not long after it was released in Japan. So that was the first thing I bought in Canada with my money. And wow, I was like so happy.
That's awesome. That is really cool.
Yeah.
So, for people that are starting out and want to kind of check out your channel and check out C64 stuff, is there a couple of videos that you would suggest that they begin with on your channel, and then kind of, what's the gateway drug to your channel?
So I would definitely, if you want to get into C64 stuff, I've got a 40th anniversary documentary that I made about 6 months ago, and it's pretty. If you want to get into the C64, and not just from a nostalgic perspective, if you want to get into it from a now perspective, the video is about old C64 and the modern scene, which is very
Nice.
important. So it's not, and how it, and covers everything of how to play new games, and every aspect from music to the European demo scene, the history of the system. It's got everything. I gathered like people from around the world and interviewed them, all people like from Europe, US, Australia, where the system was like super popular. And so it's a very broad perspective. So the C64 40th anniversary documentary, I'd definitely check out. And obviously the top 200 games, if you want to see my personal top 200, which is obviously madness, but you can go for it anyway. And, but if you want to also see other stuff about the channel, it's not just C64. Please check out the documentary section. It's a lot of variety there, and arcades, consoles, all that kind of stuff. Just stuff I like, and I've got a lot of other shows. Obviously, just all manner of video gaming. So knock yourself out.
That's pretty cool. I'm gonna leave a link. I'll embed the 40th anniversary one into the post, and I'll also link
Awesome.
to the two that my two favorites so far. I've only been able to see a handful, but
Yeah.
I like the Alien and the Strike ones both. And I actually wanted to ask
This,
your opinion on that.
mm,
If I haven't played a Strike game in 20 years,
yeah.
basically, so now what would you suggest I go to?
Ooh.
Jungle, urban, or desert? Because
Mm,
one of the points
yeah.
that you made in the video
Mm,
is that urban was pretty similar. So by the time it came out, it was like, oh, we just had this, but that doesn't apply
yeah.
to me anymore because now
Right.
I'm almost approaching it with a new set of eyes.
Yeah. 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 You make a good point there. Ooh, that would be so hard. What would I suggest now? Mm.
Not the 32X CD one.
uh, I would suggest probably. I still think Jungle Strike is the one to go for if you want to play the classic trilogy. The Genesis ones, because it's kind of middle ground. It's a little bit faster paced than Desert Strike, but it's also, it feels, I don't know, it just feels a little bit fresher than Urban. I know you're saying like if you play it now, Urban will feel fresh, but you haven't played it in like 10 years or whatever. But I think Jungle is definitely the one to go for. It just feels like the most complete to me, and the balance of everything is probably the best. The PlayStation ones are also really good.
Oh, okay.
Soviet and Nuclear Strike, very cool. I'm a big fan of full motion video. So the inclusion of FMV in those games just boosts it for me. I know a lot of people hate that, but it just adds to the cheese factor for me. But those are really good. But if you want to go classic, I would say Jungle, definitely.
Yeah, the FMV stuff is always so interesting because I remember, I mean, I remember being blown away when I was a little kid,
Yeah,
probably, I don't know, 11, 12, maybe 12, 13 tops, but like, holy crap, there's real people in
exactly.
my video game. Like, I was absolutely blown away. And in hindsight, it was like, I'd much rather watch one of those stitched together Night Trap movies than
Yeah,
actually play Night Trap. And
right.
Thunder in Paradise, I made a whole lot of jokes about that. I'm friends with
Yeah,
TL from Wrestling with Gaming, but
yeah, yeah.
that was the one that, like, I think that was the best FMV I've played so far. Although the one on the 3DO, is it Daedalus Encounter? Daedalus
Oh,
Encounter? Whatever it is.
dataless encounter, I think it's called.
Daedalus
Yeah,
Encounter. I'm
yeah,
never
yeah,
gonna be
yeah.
able to pronounce that right, but everybody says I should give that one a shot too. But I need to have
Hmm.
just like with Thunder in Paradise. I got to be patient. I can't just play 5 minutes and walk away. I got to
That
sit there
one,
and play it.
yeah, that one is actually pretty difficult to get into. I found
Really?
you definitely need some patience. It's
I
got
don't
like
have
some
much of that
weird.
anymore. I never
It's
did, but
it's got some weird mechanics, but yeah, I mean it's pretty cool. I absolutely love the Sega CD stuff by Digital Pictures. Oh man, I just Corpse Killer, just terrible stuff like that. So good, so good. Surgical Strike, Tomcat Alley. Oh, great.
I remember being absolutely devastated when I got that game because
Which
that came
one?
out all at Tomcat Alley. I
Yeah.
always wanted to be a pilot. When I was a
Yeah, yeah.
kid, I could tell you every spec of every published version of every military plane. I wanted so badly, and then I saw that game advertised. And I was just like, okay, now this is it.
Yeah.
This is what I've been waiting for. It's real people in a real F-14 that I get to. And then I bought the game. I got home and I'm like, you don't fly the plane?
No.
What do you mean you don't? Why is this even a game if you don't fly the plane? This could be.
Yeah.
Oh, and I ended
Yeah.
up beating it on easy mode, and I was devastated for that one. I couldn't believe it. I was I was more devastated about that than when I was about 16 years old, and my neighbor, who was an army recruiter, runs into me. He's like, "Hey, what are you up to?" I'm like, Navy recruiter just came by. I'm kind of considering it." And he's like, dude, you're colorblind. They won't let you pump gas into an airplane, let alone fly one. What are you doing? You can't. They'll never put you in an airplane. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Damn it.
shit. Well, there goes that.
Yeah, Tomcat Alley. Oh man, I played that so much. Up, I know it's just a shooting gallery. There's no like, you just point a cursor and just shoot. But hey, it's what I liked.
Yeah. Was there any FMV stuff on the C64?
No, C64, not even
Because
capable of
wait,
that.
it would
Because
be the
well,
successors with the
mm,
CD drives in them. That's kind of what I was thinking of, not the C64. I spit
mm,
that out wrong. Sorry.
yeah, no, I mean there were games with digitized graphics. Probably one of the best examples I could think of is a game called Mean Streets, the first Tex Murphy game, the PC series. They actually put that on the C64. It's actually pretty impressive. I can't believe they actually managed to do that. But yeah, FMV, no. Um, the Amiga has is capable of doing that in some sort of way, but not really. So FMV was just a little bit too advanced at that time because CD drives, right? The
Yeah.
Amiga and C64 obviously had disk drives, so storage
So
space
I
would just
guess
not be possible.
yeah, that's something that you might be able to clarify for people who didn't grow up with this stuff. Is there like an easy path of what happened after the C64. So C64, C128, and they merged with Amiga, and then like what was kind of the path forward from that, and what's the backward compatibility? Sorry to throw all these questions at you, but you know.
Yeah, the C64, obviously it went to the Amiga, and the Amiga had a whole lot of iterations of it, like the Amiga 1000, blah, blah, blah. And then you got the Commodore basically just kind of didn't keep up. They stuck with the Amiga architecture for a little bit too long, basically, at least from my perspective. They stuck with it a little bit too long and didn't progress enough. So PCs kind of just took over and the
Mm.
Commodore brand just kind of disappeared. So that was kind of the end of it. They also made a few, like like Sega in the late '90s. They made a few mistakes and kind of cost them big time, like the Commodore. I've totally forgot what the name of the thing is called. It's basically a consoleized Commodore 64 that came out in Europe in 1990. It was basically the C64 with no keyboard, and you just stuck cartridges in the back. That was an ill-fated thing. It was a little bit too late at that point, so that cost them, a lot and put everything back. The Amiga, they needed to, really boost their upgrade it a lot to have kept up, which they did, but it wasn't enough. So that's kind of how it all ended. But yeah, sorry, what was the other part of your question?
Um, backward compatibility. So if somebody got a later model of that stuff, could you still run
Okay.
all the C64 on it?
Yeah, so C64, which is cool about it, if you got say a Commodore 128, you could
Mhm.
still play all the C64 games. So there was no issue with that. And likewise with the Amiga, at least if you watch like say Amiga 1000 or whatever, and what later models, you could play the Amiga 500 games and everything. So there was never any issues like that, which was what I loved about older systems. They were, you could play your old stuff. Modern stuff, it's kind of hit and miss whether that's a reality or not, which it
Mhm.
should be, but whatever. Um, yeah, so it's all backwards compatible. Yeah.
Awesome. So is there anything else that I forgot to ask or talk about? Anything you wanted to mention? Because I think I really appreciate the whole perspective of growing up in a different country and how you saw this stuff. We're definitely going to link to that 40th anniversary video because I think any other questions I have, you're probably going to have cleared up right in there. But was there anything else you want to talk about that I'm just not hitting the right points here?
No, I just please check out the channel. There's a lot of variety, like I said. So if you like retro gaming and just history of gaming, you'll probably enjoy it. I'm busy working on right now. It's a third part to my arcade series, a documentary. I've got part 1 and 2. It covers the 70s and 80s in arcades.
Mhm.
I'm almost at the end of this one I'm busy working on right now. It's going to cover the 90s arcade scene. It's
90s arcade scene worldwide or specific to where you grew up or
worldwide, so
okay.
it's about 5 hours long, so you better
Woo.
strap yourself in. I'm almost done. I'm probably another week or two away from releasing it. I'm right at the end. It's taken like 2 months to put this together, but so
So it's going
yeah,
to be one 5 hour long video,
that's just the 90s.
just the 90s.
Yeah.
Would you ever consider releasing these in parts, both for algorithm reasons and just to, make it a playlist and stuff like that?
Um, well, part one, the 70s one is an hour long, so it's reasonable. But the 70s, it's obviously the birth of arcades. There's not a huge amount of games to cover. There obviously is a lot. The 80s one is like about 5 hours or so, but there's a hell of a lot of games. But I don't know. I didn't really care about the algorithm. I just make the video the way I want to watch it. I know it's not humanly possible for a person to watch a 5 hour video in one go, But
But
you
that's
can
obviously
just
not your intent. You're not asking
no,
somebody to sit on their
no,
couch
I'm
for
not.
5
No,
hours,
you
right?
can just
Yeah.
press stop on YouTube, and when you play it again, you continue. So I don't know what the big deal is, but and algorithm, I just don't care. I just make it the way I want and just release it. I know I could cut it up and make like bite-sized pieces, but what I'm gonna what I'm gonna do is once the '90s one is done, I'm gonna edit them all together to make one video. But
Yeah.
it's, to make it even more crazy, which will be about 10 hours. So,
Jeez.
but you can watch them in different decades. So, and I will put a timestamp on the year, so like 1990, 91. So if there's a specific year you want to watch, so you could just jump straight to that. So
Awesome.
yeah.
So I'll obviously link to your channel. Are you on any social media or Discords or anything like that? Where do people find you other than your channel, or nowhere else?
No, you can find me on like pretty much all social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all under BastichB 64K. Just check it out. I post stuff on like, just my game collection, covers of games, computer stuff. So it's like a supplement. It's not just a mirror image of the YouTube thing. So
Mhm.
check those out if you want to get some more info.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. I do. It took me a while to queue up that playlist, but I've been watching your videos and genuinely enjoying them. No disrespect, you wouldn't be here if I didn't like your videos. So
Awesome.
thank
Thanks a
you for
lot.
your work. Yeah, and everything that you do. And I'll let everybody know when the videos are released, and of course, I'll have links to everything here.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot, man. I
Take
really
care.
appreciate it. Cheers.